What happens when country music's most authentic storyteller sits across from daytime television's sweetheart, and their conversation takes a turn nobody saw coming? What you're about to witness is one of the most shocking moments in recent talk show history. A clash that started with good intentions, but spiraled into something that left everyone in the studio speechless. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this explosive confrontation. The Kelly Clarkson Show was supposed to be a safe haven, a place where celebrities could share their stories in a warm, welcoming environment. Kelly had built her reputation on being the host who could make anyone feel comfortable, the interviewer who asked the right questions at the right time. So when Walker Hayes, the country singer who had captured hearts with his raw honesty about family struggles and financial hardship, walked onto her stage, everyone expected another heartwarming conversation about his journey from near bankruptcy to chart-topping success. Walker settled into the guest chair with his characteristic easy smile, the same genuine warmth that had endeared him to millions of fans who saw themselves in his music. Kelly, ever the professional, started with her typical enthusiasm, praising his latest album and asking about his songwriting process. For the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. Walker spoke about his creative inspirations, his family, and the challenges of balancing fame with fatherhood. But then, Kelly shifted the conversation in a direction that would change everything. She leaned forward with that trademark concerned expression that viewers had come to associate with her more serious moments, and asked Walker about his past struggles with poverty and how it felt to finally have financial security. It seemed like an innocent enough question, the kind of inquiry that usually led to inspiring stories of perseverance and gratitude. Walker's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Those who knew him well might have caught the slight tightening around his eyes. The way his smile became just a fraction less genuine. But Kelly, focused on her next question, didn't notice the change. She pressed on, asking Walker to describe what it was like to worry about feeding his children, to wonder if he could keep the lights on, to face the possibility of losing his home. The questions kept coming, each one digging deeper into what had clearly been the darkest period of Walker's life. Kelly asked about specific moments, wanting him to paint a picture of desperation that would resonate with her audience. She mentioned his previous interviews where he had opened up about these struggles, suggesting that sharing these painful memories had helped other families going through similar hardships. Walker answered each question, but his responses became shorter, more clipped. The easy conversational flow that had marked the beginning of the interview began to feel forced. When Kelly asked him to describe the exact moment he realized he might lose everything, something in Walker's demeanor shifted completely. His jaw tightened, and he looked directly at Kelly with an intensity that made the studio audience fall silent. He took a deep breath and said, "Kelly, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but I need you to understand something. These aren't just stories for entertainment. These were the worst moments of my life. Moments when I questioned everything about myself as a husband and a father. Every time someone asks me to relive them, it takes me back to that place where I felt like a complete failure." Kelly, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone, tried to backtrack. She assured Walker that she didn't mean to cause any discomfort, and that she was simply trying to highlight his incredible journey from struggle to success. But Walker wasn't finished. He leaned forward, matching her earlier posture, and his voice took on an edge that no one in the studio had expected. "You want to know what it was really like, Kelly?" Walker continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "It was like drowning in plain sight while everyone around you pretended not to notice. It was lying awake at night wondering if your children would remember you as the dad who couldn't provide for them. It was the shame of having to choose between groceries and medicine, between keeping the car running and keeping the heat on." The studio had grown so quiet that the camera operators could be heard shifting their equipment. Kelly tried to interject, to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Walker was no longer the easygoing guest who had walked onto her stage. He had become something else entirely, a man who had been pushed too far and was finally pushing back. "But here's what really gets to me," Walker said, his voice rising slightly. "You sit here in your beautiful studio, surrounded by your success, and you ask me to perform my pain for your audience's entertainment. You want me to break down and cry about the time my daughter asked why we couldn't afford the toys other kids had. Because that makes for good television, doesn't it?" Kelly's face had gone pale. She tried to interrupt, to explain that her intentions were pure, that she had interviewed countless celebrities about their struggles and had never encountered this kind of reaction. But Walker wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at her with a mixture of disappointment and anger that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. The audience, which had been enthusiastic just minutes before, sat in stunned silence. Production assistants looked at each other uncertainly, unsure whether they should intervene or let the moment play out. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what was becoming one of the most uncomfortable interviews in daytime television history. Kelly made one more attempt to salvage the situation, suggesting they take a commercial break, but Walker was already standing up from his chair. "No, Kelly," Walker said firmly, remaining on his feet while she looked up at him with growing alarm. "We're not taking a break, so you can regroup and figure out how to get me back into my performing monkey routine. I'm done pretending that my trauma is inspirational content for your show." The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Kelly's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She had conducted thousands of interviews, navigated countless difficult conversations, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Walker wasn't just upset. He was calling out. The entire premise of what they were doing, challenging the very foundation of how talk shows operated. Walker looked around the studio, taking in the cameras, the crew, the audience that was still sitting in shocked silence. "You know what the real problem is here?" he continued, his voice carrying clearly through the space. "Everyone wants to hear about struggle, but only if it comes with a neat little bow at the end. Only if the person telling the story smiles and says how grateful they are for the experience, how it made them stronger." Kelly finally found her voice. "Walker, I understand you're upset, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I never intended to exploit your story or make light of your struggles. I've shared my own difficult moments on this show many times." "That's exactly my point," Walker shot back, his frustration reaching a new level. "You've shared your story, Kelly, on your terms when you were ready, how you wanted to tell it. But here I am, expected to perform my pain because it fits the narrative you want to create. Do you see the difference?" The studio audience began to murmur, some people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the feel-good moment they had expected when they came to a taping of the Kelly Clarkson show. They were witnessing something raw and real, but it wasn't the kind of authenticity they had signed up for. Kelly stood up as well, trying to regain some control of the situation. "Walker, please, let's just sit down and talk about this. I think we both want the same thing here. To have a meaningful conversation that might help people who are going through similar struggles." But Walker shook his head, his expression hardening further. "No, Kelly, that's where you're wrong. You want content. You want a moment that will go viral, that will get people talking about your show. You want me to cry on cue so your audience can feel good about themselves for witnessing authentic emotion. But you know what? My pain isn't your content." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Kelly's face flushed, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure cracked. "That's not fair, Walker," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I genuinely care about the stories I share on this show. I've never exploited anyone, and I resent the implication that I'm doing that now." Walker let out a bitter laugh that made several audience members visibly flinch. "You resent it. You resent being called out for treating someone's lowest moments like entertainment. Kelly, do you have any idea what it's like to have strangers approach you in grocery stores and ask you to tell them about the time you couldn't afford to buy your kids Christmas presents? Do you know what it's like to have your children's friends at school know intimate details about your family's financial struggles because you shared them on television?" The studio had become a pressure cooker, tension building with every exchange. Kelly tried again to find middle ground, but Walker was past the point of compromise. He had clearly been carrying this frustration for a long time, and Kelly's well-intentioned questions had finally caused it to boil over. "I've been on dozens of shows like this," Walker continued, his voice gaining momentum. "And every single host asks the same questions, wants the same stories, expects the same reactions. Nobody ever asks if I'm okay with reliving those moments. Nobody ever considers that maybe, just maybe, I'd like to be known for something other than how poor I used to be." Kelly's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. "Walker, I've built my career on treating my guests with respect and dignity. I've never had anyone react to my questions the way you're reacting right now. Maybe the problem isn't with my approach. Maybe it's with your attitude." The moment those words left Kelly's lips, the entire atmosphere in the studio changed. It was as if she had crossed a line that neither of them had realized existed until that moment. Walker's face went completely still. And when he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. My attitude, Walker repeated slowly. My attitude is the problem. Not the fact that you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to get me to recreate the most humiliating moments of my life for your entertainment. Not the fact that you've ignored every signal I've given you that I was uncomfortable with this line of questioning. My attitude is what's wrong here. Kelly seemed to realize she had made a mistake, but it was too late to take the words back. She tried to soften her stance, but Walker was already moving toward the edge of the set. The cameras followed his every step, the operators unsure whether they should keep filming, but unable to look away from the train wreck unfolding before them. You know what, Kelly, Walker said, turning back to face her one final time. You're absolutely right. I do have an attitude. I have an attitude about people who think my struggles are their entertainment. I have an attitude about hosts who push and push until their guests break down and then act surprised when someone finally pushes back. The studio erupted in whispers and gasps. Some audience members pulled out their phones, trying to capture what was clearly going to be a viral moment. Others sat frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing something historic or something they should pretend they never saw. Kelly made one last desperate attempt to salvage the interview. Walker, please, she called out, her voice carrying a note of genuine distress. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. That was never my intention. Can we please just sit down and work through this? But Walker was already at the edge of the set, his hand on the curtain that separated the interview area from the backstage. He turned back one final time, and his next words would be replayed on social media for weeks to come. Kelly, Walker said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the studio like a blade. I came here thinking I was going to have a conversation with someone who understood what it meant to overcome adversity. Instead, I found someone who wants to package my pain and sell it to her audience as inspiration porn. So, no, we can't work through this because you fundamentally don't understand what you've done wrong. The words landed with devastating precision. Kelly's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, hurt, anger, and finally something that looked like recognition, but it was too late for understanding. Walker had already pulled back the curtain, and the last thing the audience saw of him was his silhouette disappearing into the darkness beyond the set. For several long seconds, the studio remained frozen in complete silence. Kelly stood alone at the interview area, looking lost and uncertain. The audience didn't know whether to applaud, boo, or simply sit in the uncomfortable quiet that had settled over everything like a heavy blanket. The camera operators continued filming, capturing Kelly's face as she processed what had just happened. Finally, Kelly cleared her throat and attempted to address the audience directly. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice shakier than anyone had ever heard it on television. I want to apologize to all of you for what just happened. That was not the conversation any of us expected to have today. But even as she spoke, it was clear that Kelly was struggling to find her footing. She had built her reputation on being able to connect with anyone, on creating a safe space where people felt comfortable sharing their stories. Walker's accusations had shaken that foundation, and everyone in the studio could see it. Some audience members began to murmur among themselves, trying to process what they had witnessed. Others sat in stunned silence, still trying to understand how a routine celebrity interview had transformed into something so raw and confrontational. The energy in the room was unlike anything anyone associated with the show had ever experienced. Kelly tried to regain her composure, but her usual warmth seemed forced now, artificial in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. I think, she continued, still addressing the audience, sometimes conversations don't go the way we plan them. Sometimes people have feelings and reactions that catch us off guard. But even as she said the words, they rang hollow. Walker's accusations hung in the air like an echo that wouldn't fade. He had challenged not just Kelly's approach, but the entire format of celebrity interviews, the expectation that famous people should bare their souls for public consumption, and the idea that drama could be transformed into inspiration through the magic of television. A producer finally stepped onto the set, whispering something in Kelly's ear. She nodded, looking grateful for the intervention, and turned back to the audience with a forced smile. We're going to take a short break, she announced. But we'll be right back with a very special musical performance. As the cameras stopped rolling and the break music began to play, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. This wasn't just an awkward interview moment that could be edited out later. This was a complete breakdown of the usual talk show dynamic captured on camera with a live studio audience as witnesses. Audience members immediately began reaching for their phones, typing furiously to share what they had just witnessed. Social media posts started appearing before the show had even finished taping. Videos recorded by audience members began circulating, showing Walker's final moments on set from different angles, each one capturing the intensity of his words and the shock on Kelly's face. Behind the scenes, the show's producers were in crisis, trying to figure out how to handle what had just happened. This wasn't like other controversial interview moments that could be spun or contextualized. Walker had made specific accusations about Kelly's motives and methods, accusations that struck at the heart of how daytime television operated. Kelly herself retreated to her dressing room, accompanied by her team. For someone who had handled difficult interviews before, who had navigated sensitive topics with grace and professionalism, this was uncharted territory. Walker hadn't just disagreed with her questions. He had fundamentally challenged her approach to interviewing and accused her of exploiting people's pain for entertainment value. The musical performance that followed felt surreal, a jarring contrast to the intensity of what had just occurred. The singer performed with professional enthusiasm, but the audience was clearly distracted, still processing the confrontation they had witnessed. Many people were whispering to each other, sharing their thoughts and reactions to Walker's explosive exit. When the show resumed after the musical number, Kelly seemed more composed, but there was still an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. She addressed the audience again, attempting to acknowledge what had happened without dwelling on it. "Sometimes," she said, "conversations take unexpected turns, and we learn something from those moments." But the damage was already done. The internet had exploded with clips and commentary about Walker's walk-off. The phrase inspiration porn that he had used began trending on social media platforms. People were dissecting every moment of the interview, analyzing Walker's body language, Kelly's questions, and the point at which the conversation had gone off the rails. News outlets picked up the story within hours, with entertainment reporters scrambling to get additional context and reactions from other celebrities who had appeared on talk shows. The incident sparked broader conversations about the ethics of celebrity interviews and the expectation that famous people should share their most painful experiences for public consumption. Kelly's team worked overtime to control the narrative, releasing statements emphasizing her respect for all guests and her commitment to creating a safe space for meaningful conversations. But Walker's words had struck a nerve that went beyond just his individual experience. He had articulated something that many people, both celebrities and regular viewers, had felt, but hadn't quite been able to express. The show that was supposed to air would require significant editing, cutting around the confrontation while trying to maintain some semblance of coherent programming. But no amount of editing could erase what had happened or prevent the story from spreading across every entertainment news platform and social media site. The ripple effects of Walker's explosive exit extended far beyond the studio walls. Within hours, the confrontation had become the most talked-about moment in daytime television, with clips circulating across every social media platform and news outlets scrambling to provide analysis of what had transpired. But more than just creating a viral moment, Walker's words had opened a conversation that the entertainment industry wasn't entirely prepared to have. Celebrity after celebrity began speaking out, some defending Kelly's interview style while others supported Walker's stance. The divide wasn't clean or predictable. Musicians defending talk show hosts while actors criticized the industry's treatment of personal trauma as entertainment fodder. The conversation had touched on something deeper than just one uncomfortable interview. It had exposed the complex relationship between fame, privacy, and public consumption of personal pain. Kelly found herself in the unprecedented position of having to defend not just her own methods, but the entire premise of celebrity interviews as they had evolved over decades of television. In carefully crafted statements released through her publicist, she emphasized her genuine care for her guests and her commitment to creating meaningful conversations. But the statements felt defensive in a way that Kelly had never had to be before. Lacking the natural warmth and authenticity that had made her such a beloved television personality, the entertainment industry began to examine its own practices. With an uncomfortable scrutiny, other talk show hosts found themselves fielding questions about their own interview techniques, about whether they had ever pushed guests too far in pursuit of compelling television. The phrase that Walker had used, inspiration porn, became a rallying cry for critics of how the media handled stories of struggle and recovery. Meanwhile, Walker himself remained notably silent in the immediate aftermath of the walk-off. His social media accounts, which usually featured regular updates about his music and family life, went quiet. His team released a brief statement saying that he was taking time to focus on his family and would address the situation when he felt ready to do so. The silence only added to the intrigue and speculation surrounding the incident. The show's producers faced their own challenges in deciding how to handle the episode. The confrontation was too significant to simply edit out completely, but airing it in full would mean broadcasting one of the most uncomfortable moments in the show's history. They ultimately decided to include portions of the exchange while cutting the most heated moments. But even the edited version couldn't hide the tension and Walker's obvious discomfort with the line of questioning. Kelly's approach to subsequent interviews became noticeably different. She seemed more cautious, more aware of her guests' comfort levels, asking permission before delving into sensitive topics in a way she hadn't felt the need to do before. Some critics said this made her interviews less compelling, while supporters praised her for showing that she had learned from the experience. The incident also sparked conversations in journalism schools and media ethics. Courses about the responsibility of interviewers when dealing with subjects' personal trauma. Walker's accusation that Kelly was treating his pain as content for entertainment became a case study in the balance between public interest and personal dignity. Fans of both Kelly and Walker found themselves divided, with some feeling that Walker had overreacted to well-intentioned questions while others believed he had courageously stood up against an exploitative system. The debate played out endlessly on social media, with passionate arguments on both sides and very little middle ground to be found. The music industry also felt the impact of Walker's words. Several artists came forward with their own stories of uncomfortable interview experiences, of being pushed to discuss personal tragedies or struggles they would rather keep private. The conversation expanded beyond just talk shows to include the entire ecosystem of celebrity media, from magazine interviews to red carpet questions. When Walker finally did break his silence weeks later, it was through a carefully written statement posted on his social media accounts. He didn't apologize for his reaction, but he did clarify that his frustration wasn't specifically with Kelly as a person, but with a system that he felt had normalized the exploitation of personal pain for public entertainment. He also announced that he would be taking a break from doing interviews and would be more selective about the media appearances he chose to participate in going forward. The statement was measured and thoughtful, acknowledging the complexity of the situation, while standing firm in his conviction that something fundamental needed to change about how the entertainment industry approached personal stories. It didn't end the controversy, but it did provide some clarity about his motivations and his hopes for how the incident might lead to positive changes. Kelly, for her part, used the experience as an opportunity for growth and reflection. In subsequent interviews about her own show and her approach to hosting, she spoke candidly about how Walker's words had forced her to examine her own methods and motivations. She implemented new protocols for her show, including pre-in discussions about sensitive topics and explicit consent from guests before exploring difficult personal territory. The confrontation between Walker Hayes and Kelly Clarkson became more than just a moment of television drama. It became a catalyst for broader conversations about celebrity culture, media responsibility, and the human cost of turning personal struggle into public entertainment. Neither Kelly nor Walker emerged from the incident unchanged, and neither did the industry that had created the conditions for such an explosive confrontation to occur. The legacy of that heated exchange continues to influence how celebrity interviews are conducted, with both hosts and guests being more mindful of the boundaries between public interest and personal privacy. Walker's walk-off became a defining moment that reminded everyone involved in celebrity media that behind every compelling story is a real person who deserves to have their dignity and emotional well-being respected. What do you think was the real turning point in this confrontation? Was it Kelly's question about Walker's children, her comment about his attitude, or something else entirely? Subscribe to hear more incredible stories like this one.